Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Bryce
This
Vine.
is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Daryl.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero, and this week's fight features 7 rounds of a monstrous ball. In the red corner, hailing from the Tony Enclave of Willowdale in Toronto, the undisputed kings of mountainous chop-laden anytime signature we fucking want at any time rock, the princes of Prague, the Pied Pipers of Pimple-Faced, the Mighty Rush, with their 8th album. This was their 8th album from 1981, Moving Pictures. Faces off against the kings of intellect pop rock, the Bard College Brawlers, Steely Dan with their 6th album from 1977, Asia. Joining me are 2 of my esteemed colleagues to my virtual right via satellite, sequestered in his secure compound at the fall line of the James River, the Sentinel of Sensacomica, the Yarb. And to my left, a man who needs no introduction, because his appendage enters the room early to tip off his arrival. At least it has about 5 times when I was in the room. The peaches to my herb. You know him as Sweet Pea, the boogie down professional, PJ the DJ, the freak of the funk, Peter Crosby. And with our pre-fight analysis, the sauce man cometh. Richard Lackey, take it away.
I'm going to say something that might surprise some of you. I have strong opinions about this fight. But luckily, I have my patent-pending system to predict who will win, so I don't have to bore you with one guy's opinion. I mean, I won't have to tell you that I really, really hate Steely Dan. And I won't have to tell you why. You know, like, for instance, a time I went to see them live at a festival and had to sit through 2 fucking hours of jazz rock. And before I continue, why doesn't jazz rock ever sound like Miles Davis or Coltrane? And why does it always sound like that trio the guy Brian in accounting is in that plays Sunday brunch at the local Applebee's? And I won't even call Steely Dan Dockers rock either. You know, oh, they aren't Dockers rock at all. Because, and let's do an experiment here. Close your eyes and imagine an adult diapers or a reverse mortgage commercial, and then put Reelin' in the Years in the bed in the background playing. You can totally hear it, right? I'm right about this, right? And I won't have to say that Steely Dan peaked at Dirty Work and it was all downhill, boring-ass jazz rock ever since. So thanks to the patent-pending system, I can tell you who should win without having to say any of that. And unfortunately, the numbers are pretty strong for Steely Dan here. The streaming popularity numbers were split between a tie and a complete blowout for Steely Dan. All other factors, sales, Grammys, reviews, averages, all went to the most boring band in rock and roll. The only win that Rush could pull out in this one was if we took common reviewing bodies only and averaged them together. So everything according to the numbers looks like a 5-2 win for Steely Dan here. I'm going to slightly adjust this for the human element and say it will probably go to Steely Dan 4 rounds to 3. The problem here is Rush is so front-loaded with a super strong side 1, but finishes with a pretty weak side 2. They'd have to win way too many of the early rounds unanimously to take it, and I'm not so sure they can here. Look to rounds 1, 2, and 4 for Rush, and rounds 3, 4, and 7 for Steely Dan for their strong rounds. And in closing, fuck Steely Dan, I'm rooting for Rush. Back to you guys. Oh, yeah, and all these opinions are mine, and they aren't to the opinions of the wonderful hosts, John and Pete of the Break It Down show. They're all mine. Thank you.
It's mathematical magic. What do you think, Yarb?
This one's tough. I decided to kind of change up my tactics this time. I know the last time I was here with you guys, I had a couple that I was torn between, and I even thought there might be some ties. I said, going into this one, no matter what, there won't be a tie, and I wish like hell I hadn't decided to do that on this one.
Okay. Yeah. Pete, any pre-fight thoughts?
Well, you know, these are both seminal albums,
yeah.
So it's tough, and I love them both. And my approach was more of how these albums influenced me and how they affected me when they came out and when I heard them.
Okay.
So more of kind of a historical thing than the way I feel about them now.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I approached it.
Yeah, you old motherfucker. Neither one of us were around when these things came out. So anyway.
Oh, yeah.
I know,
Yeah.
that's a lot.
Definitely not Asian.
All right, well then, here we go. Round 1 is Tom Sawyer versus Black Cow. PJ the DJ. Kick us off.
All right. So Black Cow is a legendary intro track. But what drummer between 30 and 60 years old can say that whenever they heard that in-your-face smash of the bass drum, crash cymbal, and descending synth note beginning of Tom Sawyer, that they didn't instantly and passionately break out into air drumming and continue unbroken said air drumming throughout the entirety of the song, each and every time they heard the song?
Jesus.
Not me.
No.
So, for me, Tom Sawyer.
Okay.
Round 1 goes to Tom Sawyer. That's all I got.
All right. Yarb, what'd you do?
It's a battle of two very interesting albums. Growing up, my dad had a little Steely Dan mixtape. He'd always play that when we'd go on road trips, and so that was always there. But there was no band probably more omnipresent, with maybe the exception of the Beatles, than Rush. So this is definitely a tough. On Black Cow, you've got some really good moments there. You've got that great sax solo by Wayne Shorter. He played some with Miles Davis. So there's some fantastic moments there, but Pete's got it right. I have it here too. I have it actually as a knockdown right from the gate with Tom Sawyer. I have it 10-8 Tom Sawyer, and I'll tell you why. For me, there are so many layers to Tom Sawyer. Later Rush albums would become very synth heavy, but I felt like this is the album where they had that nice mix. Not too much, not too little. And on Tom Sawyer, there'll be a moment where you're listening to Geddy with that slap in that bass line, and suddenly you'll hear Alex come in, and then they'll both sort of fade back and sing. Dead center of it all is one of the greatest drummers of all time, in my opinion. And he just, like Pete said, who doesn't sit there and air drum that boom, 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 boom moment in the song. But yeah, I have that as they came out, throw a haymaker. And 8-10 in favor of Tom Sawyer.
Wow. Okay. Well, Steely Dan to me is a Rolls Royce. Okay, time and again they've delivered the absolute best in refinement and craftsmanship. And Black Cow is the first presentation on this album. Joe Sample, Tom Scott, Larry Carlton. You know, these guys are absolute royalty on their instruments, but also like a Rolls Royce. It's not the first glance that really gets you. Tom Sawyer, though, you're right. It's a defining song for Rush.
It sets
and their
the tone for the album,
that the
too.
album's underway. That's right. It sets the tone. Here we go. We're coming out throwing haymakers. I'll bet that 100,000 drum sets were bought, and that at least that many girls lost interest in some nerd who was entirely too into this song to notice eyelashes being batted at him. So Neil Peart does kick in the door. Geddy Lee throws in the smoke bomb of the Oberheim OBX. And then Alex Lifeson. Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Intro just...
Here we go. Nerding out. No chicks are interested in what we're doing. Yes. Alex Lifeson also taught 1 million kids about harmonics. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's a Marvin Hagler round for Rush. They came out throwing.
I've always felt that Lifeson is one of the most underrated guitarists of all time. Yep. I mean, is he one of the best? That's a conversation for a different time. But as far as underrated, maybe even underappreciated, he's just...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, it's the situation where he showed up with Geddy Lee and Neil Peart.
Yeah.
And if he was in any other band, he'd be the star of the show.
Absolutely.
But he came with those other two guys. So guess what? He's going to play his part, and it's going to be amazing. And fewer people are going to notice him than would have noticed him had he been in, you know, in another band, in any other band, practically.
Right.
Not a blistering soloist, but Rush had a particular sound, and it needed the right guitar player to create the textures.
Absolutely.
And the harmonic structure, and he was the perfect guy. I don't think anyone else could have done it like him.
And they're analogous to another trio we like. He's sort of the Andy Summers of the band, where, again, he's providing tons of texture and is the perfect guy in the perfect spot. And I agree. So we went unanimous on round one with Tom Sawyer.
All right.
Round two. Red Barchetta versus Asia. Yarb, kick us off on this one.
I think the word you're going to hear a lot when I talk about Steely Dan here is smooth and soothing and layers. They're both albums of layers. This is one that takes you on a really great journey in terms of the lyrical journey. You know, he's that line, double helix in the sky, and Fagan is just really on point with the song. However, when you look at the other side of it at Red Barchetta, he starts singing about the car, and suddenly, vroom, vroom, you hear the car. They're not using a cheesy sound effect of a car. It's all with the instruments, and you feel like you're in the car. He talks about gravel spitting up off the tires, and you feel like you're driving down that highway. And it tells, to me, just a little more of a compact story. I actually scored this one 10-9 in favor of Red Barchetta.
Aha. Okay. Well, I had it close also. Red Barchetta is the fictional account of a boy whose uncle has stashed away for some 50-some-odd years a Ferrari, a brilliant red Barchetta from a better varnished time. The story is set in a heavily regulated future where the motor law, quote-unquote, prohibits anything this expressive and this gorgeous, and it's based on a short story that's called A Nice Morning Drive, which was written by an author named Richard Foster. It appeared in the November 1973 issue of Road and Track. The story of the story is really cool, and you should look it up. Richard Foster and Neil Peart have actually become really good friends and taken plenty of motorcycle trips together, and that didn't happen until years after the song. So it is really pretty cool. But as good as that song is, we've stepped into the Rolls Royce now, and it's downright opulent in here. You want a sax solo, like you mentioned, get Wayne Shorter. What the fuck? How about Michael O'Martian on piano? For our listeners who've never heard of Michael O'Martian, well, he subsequently became the first producer to chart #1 hits in 3 consecutive decades. He's been nominated for 17 different Grammys, and his cum number, that is the cumulative total of records sold that he's played on or produced, exceeds 350 million.
Wow.
Also, perhaps most importantly, Steve motherfucking Gadd.
Right?
Nothing can, I believe, earn a vote against Steve Gadd's solos for me on Asia. Rush, admirably, though, stays on its feet. I scored at Asia 10-9. What'd you do, Pete?
I stayed within your directions and wrote a 2-line thing. I'm gonna expound on that. Okay.
Please expound.
Okay. So first of all, do you know how many people you ask 10 of your musician friends who like music and like Steely Dan, but maybe aren't totally aware of all the personnel? Mm-hmm. And ask them how much they like that sax solo in Asia, and 8 out of 10 will go, that's one of my favorite Michael Brecker solos.
Yeah.
So many people are positive that's Michael Brecker. Uh-huh. It's not. It's Wayne Shorter.
Right.
And people have said that Wayne Shorter had brought music into the 20th century because even, in the 60s, the stuff at Miles and Train we're doing was still based on 19th century chord changes, and Wayne Shorter came in with these chord changes and these progressions that had never been seen before.
Holy shit.
So you ask some music professor, classical or jazz, and they'll say, oh yeah, this guy brought music into the 20th century.
That is very heady.
Yeah. Barchetta is one of my favorite tunes. Going back to as a kid, I was in 6th grade, I think, when this album came out. I had just started playing drums. And this album and Neil Peart, made me want to really practice and get better and play drums. So I love Red Barchetta. I love the whole storyline. Mm-hmm. The lyrics actually tell a logical story. But Asia, the song, is a masterpiece.
Yeah.
The harmonic sophistication, Steve Gadd and Wayne Shorter solos, and like most Steely Dan albums, but just in particular with this album and every song, perfectly produced. I mean, it's just this not a lot of overproduction, not very wet, a very dry, just beautiful sound. Everything is perfectly balanced.
This is the Rolls-Royce factor.
And it has those little inflections of Asian, almost Asian pop. That's the only thing I can kind of compare it to.
Wow.
Where it just sort of drifts into that sort of Asian feel and then comes right back out into more of that jazz, that almost...
Yeah, when you start to hear the Joe Sample chords.
Right, exactly.
They, better than any other band, really brought the jazz kind of idioms and influence into a popular rock band and made their own kind of music. I mean, literally in a record store, you could have rock, you could have jazz, and then you could have Steely Dan.
Right.
And nobody did it as well as them. And so I went 10-9 for Asia on this one.
Okay. I'm going to correct you because I watched him on the Drum Solos Week that Dave Letterman used to do.
Uh-huh.
It's Peart.
It's Peart, okay.
Yeah. And it's weird because when I first heard that, I thought, well, you know what? If I'm going to correct somebody, I'm going to say, Peart. It rhymes with... That rhymes with fucking nothing.
Yeah.
Fewer things rhyme with Peart than rhyme with orange.
Yeah.
So, anyway. Round 3 is YYZ versus Deacon Blues. Now, the International Air Transportation Association issues every airport a 3-digit location identifier. Ours out here in San Francisco is SFO. Yarb's out there in Richmond, Virginia is RIC. YYZ, interestingly, is the IATA station code for the Toronto Pearson International Airport.
It's Pearson.
Pearson. rhymes with, well, it doesn't rhyme with fucking anything. And the opening rhythmic pattern, which is in 10/8, is the YYZ in Morse code.
Yeah.
The guys have all said that it's a tribute to that moment when they see YYZ on their luggage tags. It means they're going home. So for guys who spend as much time on the road as they have over the decades, that's really cool. But this song, fun as it is musical masturbation. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not disparaging masturbation. I'll rub one out with the best of them. But compared to the lush Tom Scott horn arrangement, the cryptic lyricism of Donald Fagen, Chuck Rainey's fucking silky bass line, and that sax solo by Pete Christlieb. Pete Christlieb was one of the sax players in the Tonight Show band that was headed by Doc Severinsen and had Ed Shaughnessy on the drums. And one night after they taped the Tonight Show, I think they taped 2 episodes in a day, and then he went to the studio. The guys hadn't yet even met him. They only knew him by reputation. And they brought him into the studio, and he was fucking one-take Jake. They pressed the record button, and he went crazy, and that's what we got. And then there's the groove and the fills by Bernard Purdy. Compared to the musical masturbation that is YYZ, Deacon Blues is an orgy with massage therapist supermodels. So Rush, again, takes a punch to the liver and still doesn't manage to get wobbly. I scored it 10-9 Steely Dan, but I'm hanging in there with Rush, and I love him for being in this fight. What do you think, Yarb?
I love both of these fucking albums. I'm gonna say it right there.
Same here.
And Deacon Blues might be one of my favorite Steely Dan songs. In fact, several of my favorite Steely Dan songs are on this album. I love the lyrical work that Fagen does on this is masterful. One of my favorite lines in there is, "Make love to these women, languid and bittersweet." It's just, it's fucking poetry. And then there's one. It is again an example of Moses parting the Red Sea. For me personally, it's how I interpret it. It's just, you've got one side is Alex, one side is Geddy, and there's Neil sitting in the middle, and there's this little bit of peppering of the synthesizers, and I am always struck by the masterful amount of noise that can come out of 3 guys that some bands of 5, 6 guys couldn't even touch that. So I know we're starting to see a little trend here, but I actually went 10-9 in favor of Rush.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. You know, listening to John talk about Deacon Blues, I almost wanted to change my vote. But
as often happens on the album
now I just
fight.
listen. You know, I love Deacon Blues. I love its open, breezy feeling.
Absolutely.
Like driving down a central California highway on a warm and dry summer night on your way to camping with your friends. But again, the air drumming. And this is one of those songs that brought it out. Moving Pictures made me want to really play drums. I feel that if that album did not come out in 81, drums might have been something that I started and just gave up and just, you know, literally I might not have stuck with them.
Yeah.
And it was just, you know, every single drummer was listening and trying to do what Neil Peart was doing. Peart.
Rhymes with
Eart. Yeah. You know, YYZ with its epic trade 1s and a trade 2 at the end got my air drums a thumping and has served as an inspiration ever since. So I did YYZ 10-9.
Okay. I will accept that. I have no choice. Will you keep it going and do round 4? Limelight versus Peg. How'd you score that one?
Okay. So Limelight has perhaps my favorite Neil Peart opening lick. Okay. It's so simple and so pure, yet so cool and kind of funky.
Thank God, because
Yeah.
Jesus.
What?
The fills that he's challenged us to do.
Oh, yeah.
He gave us one that was approachable just so we
Yes.
wouldn't fucking completely give up.
Yeah.
Please carry on.
So, you know, the thing is, when you heard it for the first 10 years that I knew that song, I thought it was more difficult than it was.
Yes.
But it's not. It's...
Do you remember Lowdown, Boss Skaggs,
No, I don't.
Jeff Porcaro on the drums?
I don't.
Oh, okay. Well,
Okay.
it was
Is
one
it-
of those examples where
It's just
you wanted to play something really complicated,
Yeah, but it's
not that complicated.
Yeah. This one's even more pure. It's 4 quarter notes, last one dotted, bass drum with a clamp cymbal, and then bass drum with an open crash on 1. So it seems like the beat is kind of getting reversed, but it's just prop prop boom prop psh, psh.
Yeah.
And it's so just da da boom ba da da ka ka boo ka psh, psh. It's just such a great opening. I love that lick. And I love Limelight. Another thing about Limelight, Rush would take odd time signatures and they could make them palatable for radio play. It's Limelight is such a, you know, singable melody. You forget that that's in 5. Da da da. No, it's 7. Da 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 da. You're just grooving to this, and it's like, oh, that's right. They're dropping one of the beats. It's 7. It's not 8. But they were great at taking.
It's like when a girl is walking through like the boardwalk and she's holding her boyfriend's hand and she realizes this motherfucker's wearing suspenders.
Yeah.
I did not notice.
Yeah. So it's so singable.
Sorry. I don't know why.
It's so singable.
So funny to me.
Yarb, you're not wearing suspenders, are you?
No, actually not.
Okay, just making sure.
That'd have been great.
I would have noticed. And I love Limelight. It's one of those ones that still gets radio play, and it's a beautiful song. But Peg was the very first Steely Dan song I ever heard. And this is on the radio in '77, right? I might have still been in San Jose. There might have been like because it was the year we moved from San Jose to Pleasanton, and you know, it was the first song I heard, and it was all over. That super smooth and swinging hi-hat beat with where he just opens the cymbals halfway.
Just the hair.
Just the hair. So it's just a buzz. It's not an open.
Yeah.
It's so good. The Michael McDonald backgrounds.
Dude. Fuck.
You know.
Oh, my God.
Everybody thinks you do. And
Our collective Michael McDonald, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Might be the best
Gorgeous.
one ever.
Yeah. Yeah. And the perfect Jay Graydon guitar solo.
Jay Graydon.
Yeah.
God damn it.
So I remember that the episode of Classic Album,
Uh-huh.
on TV when they broke this album down, and they whipped out, if not everyone, at least 6 other guitar solos that were recorded.
Uh-huh.
And they're
Larry
all
Carlton.
Yeah.
Thrown out.
Yep.
Skunk Baxter.
Yeah.
Thrown out.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah. They're all good solos.
Yep.
But it's not
But
even
they're not
close.
perfect.
It's not even close. And they talk about the Hawaiian feel, kind of slide guitar in the beginning.
Yeah.
And it's a short, perfect. So it's an example of not only do they know their instruments and they know what people to use, they know which exact take and which solo to use.
Yep.
They were both just like, that's the one.
Yep. It's really the equivalent of asking 5 master woodworkers, the 5 greatest woodworkers on the planet, to carve us a dashboard.
Yep.
And this is what Rolls-Royce Factor is.
Yep.
Those 4 dashboards are pretty good. Mm-hmm. This one's the perfect one.
Yeah. And by a strong margin.
Yeah.
So this one, Peg 10-9.
All right, Yarb?
Oh, man.
Oh, man.
So for me, again, another one of those that is probably one of my favorite. Again, the Michael McDonald harmonies and background vocals. To me, it is like the quintessential Steely Dan song. It's got Fagen and Becker just doing what they do, and then you've got all those little pieces. They just seem to always find the right session musicians to complement their skills. And so it is what is very unique, however, about these 2 songs is that they're both about fame to some degree. And
Boy, that's true.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
Whereas Peg is sort of the little bit of research I did was apparently there was an actress, I want to say in like the 30s or 40s, and she had thrown herself off the top of the Hollywood sign right before her first movie ever debuted, and that this may have been the thing that inspired Fagen to write the song. On the flip side of that is a far more cynical take on fame from Neil's perspective. And this is one of the 3 during this that I struggled. Like it came very close when I told you that I didn't want to do ties. This was one of them where it came extraordinarily close. And then when I started listening lyrically, and Neil invokes Shakespeare, all the world is just a stage, we are merely players, and then takes his own spin off of that. Even though it is probably a little more cynical than Peg, it's certainly a more realistic reflection of the man. 10-9 Limelight.
Wow. I can't really dispute the score, but
it was close.
Limelight is not just what, as you mentioned, Pete, what made Odd Time palatable on the radio. It made Odd Time digestible to me. Because aside from Take 5, which, it's almost hard to notice that that's an odd signature because you can feel it so deeply.
Yeah.
This groove you also feel pretty deeply. And for that, I really, really dug it, of course. But the single best thing about doing the Break It Down show is the excuse that it gives me to meet so many of my heroes. And I'm going to step it further and say that I've really been very fortunate to have made some of those heroes friends. And one of my favorite friends that I've made out of the show is Rick Marotta. He's such an amazing human being and a great positive presence for all of us. Peg is the song that first made me pay attention to him. And the first time that I heard Peg, like you, I was a kid. In 1977, I went back to Guam. For the first time since I left there in 75, which was a really seminal moment that seared in my memory for the difference that it was. When you travel and you go somewhere completely different, you come back a different person.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the times that I went and rediscovered my original home and came back a different person. And Peg was on the radio almost constantly while we were there. That and Maneater, oddly. But because that memory is seared into my imagination and Peg was part of the soundtrack of it, I had one version of Peg in my mental inventory. Later, when I came back to this album, I was steeped in the euphoria of Appetite for Destruction. I had hair down to my waist, and all I wanted to do was rock hard with baseball bats in both hands. And I was playing, for our drum nerds out there, I was playing 3 S's, which is a snare drum marching stick.
Marching sticks.
On my drum set. Wow. And hitting them hard.
Logs.
Yeah, logs. And so Peg kind of snapped me out of that spell and reminded me that you could play with subtlety and finesse and still embody the funk and still play with masculinity. Also, Chuck Rainey's thump line. You guys mentioned Michael McDonald's vocals, which are unmatched to this day.
Yeah.
It's your favorite foreign movie. It will come back.
I mean, still, with the body of work that he's amassed since, and nobody knew the fuck Michael McDonald was back then.
He's the only background singer who had a signature sound in background vocals.
In background vocals. Yeah.
It's like that actually is the more distinct vocal sound than the lead vocals.
Yep.
But he's not overdoing it. He's not singing on top. He's balanced, and it's just the tone and quality of the sound. There's Michael McDonald in the background.
And he still says that was one of the most difficult songs he's ever cut.
Wow.
So,
and by the
he's
way,
cut a lot of songs since then.
And I didn't realize this. The background is all Michael McDonald. It's Michael McDonald 3 times. That's why it's so Michael McDonald.
And that chord is so tight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Right.
The no.
And just the influence that he's had as the vocalist. I mean, obviously he has gone on into hip hop with Warren G and others that he's influenced.
Wow.
So it's kind of that nexus of you hear him, you know who.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
I mean,
You know what? He of course is known as being an absolutely amazing piano player, but he wasn't good enough to play piano for Steely Dan. Okay, Jay Graydon and that fucking hula guitar solo that he meticulously recreated for the movie Hired Gun. You guys go back, everyone, and listen to the Fran Strine episodes of the show from 2 weeks ago. If you skipped over him for any reason, Fran Strine is fucking amazing. He's great. He's a terrific storyteller, and also one of my favorite new friends that I've made on the show. Go back and listen to it's a 2-parter from 2 weeks ago. And if you guys haven't heard it, and if you haven't seen his movie Hired Gun, if this conversation that we're having means anything to you, go watch Hired Gun. Yep. That guy is terrific. Nothing could make me vote against Rick Marotta. I love that man. So 10-9 pegs. Much as I love Limelight, as much as I love Limelight.
Yeah, they're all close. Yeah.
I'm voting Steely Dan.
Yep.
Round 5 is Camera Eye versus Home at Last. Yarb, start us off on round 5.
So for me, Home at Last, it takes you on a nice journey. It's got some really nice pieces in there, but it does, at points, for me, feel very typical of the sound that Steely Dan has. It almost is, I mean, it's effortless at times. Again, I'm a big sucker for harmonies, and there's some great harmonies in there. But then you lay it up against Camera Eye and what Alex, Geddy, and Neil do in the first 3 minutes of that song. And it's a long song. It's almost 11 minutes long. They do essentially an instrumental that's, like a YYZ kind of instrumental to open that song. And there's only like 2 minutes left in Home at Last by the time that's, just getting started. It invokes a certain, I guess the best way I could put it is just I hear that song and I kind of get charged up from the instrumentals of it. It was close, but again, I went 10-9 in favor of Rush. It's a pattern. I'm
Yeah.
I'm really sorry here. But again, I love Steely Dan, and there were several times that I was like 10-10, 10-10. But I had to
this
find that
this
one
tennis
thing.
match that you and I are having, Yarb, where we go, no, seriously, I love Rush. And you go, no, seriously, I love Steely Dan. And it's just this razor-thin margin
It is.
that we're dealing with here.
Razor thin.
And it comes down to a personal preference thing that really just speaks to just one thing eking out a win versus another in a round, and it's really what makes this stuff fun.
Yeah, for me, it was just that
camera
3
eye.
minutes. It was that 3 minutes at the beginning. I was looking at the two laid next to each other. I'm sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt.
No.
And it's just that whole. It's like watching a painter, almost like Bob Ross.
Okay.
He's painting that first thin layer, and then he just starts dabbing in the happy little trees, and you don't quite know what the picture's going to look like. But when that 3 minutes is over and Getty starts singing, suddenly it takes on a whole. It is almost like two different songs in one.
Yarb gets on my fucking nerves. Okay, we're talking about an 11-minute meandering song. And there's a synth chord build up in the intro, and it's because of the sound, but the intro is, it's got a date stamp on it for sure. And I kind of felt like, damn, get to it already. Jesus, it's a minute 39 before a fucking groove starts to show up. And it's not really exciting. But now that you mention it, it is a Bob Ross painting because you hear it and sonically it's like, well, this isn't exciting. But the two things together become a thing. Mm-hmm. And then there's the drama of the fills. I mean, the composition is adventurous. The instrumentation absolutely, of course, deserves a nod. That's what Rush does best. Now, speaking of what people do best, Home at Last, Bernard Purdie, and the Halftime Shuffle.
Yep.
This is a thing that is just, it's like Muhammad Ali's footwork. It's just nobody plays a halftime shuffle like fucking Bernard and Purdie. Yeah. And no matter who plays it, if Gadd plays it, if Murata plays it, if anybody fucking plays it, it's still a Purdie shuffle.
It is. They are nodding to him.
They are nodding to Bernard Purdie.
Yeah.
He has not been on the show yet. We are going to get Bernard Purdie. He may not know it, but absolutely I'm coming for Bernard. Every once in a while, Pete will ask me, who is a dream guest we haven't gotten yet? And when we started having this conversation, I said, J.R. Robinson. Well, he's been on the show twice. We hang out at his house. Rick Murata. He's been on the show twice. We hang out at his house. My dream guest, who we will not sleep until we do justice on this show, is Bernard Purdie. I love Bernard Purdie.
And he's got to bring the signs.
He's got to bring the signs.
He's got to bring the signs.
Check this out, Yarb. I don't know if you know this, but Bernard Purdie, when you get him for a session, he sets his drums up, and then he puts signs up around his drums. And they say shit like, congratulations. You hired the hitmaker.
You did it. You hired the hitmaker.
You did it. And it's something to get the mood in a place where Bernard Purdie brings with him a fucked up sweater and an incredible groove.
Yeah.
That just Aretha Franklin has capitalized on it. I mean, we could go on and on forever about Bernard Purdie and the influence that he's had on music across genres.
Yeah. But I just love that those signs are in the ISO room in the studio.
Yeah.
It's not just like it's while he's playing and laying the tracks, those signs are right behind him.
And the other thing that's great about him is that the amount of control he displays. You remember the instructional videos that everybody had and still do in the 80s. It would be like, guitar with the Yarb, and then you'd go up and you'd say something, and then they'd play the intro from the hit song that you had, and you'd be playing the hell out of it, and then they'd go back to you, and you'd cut to you sitting down on a stool going, okay, when I first came up with that part, what I had to realize was when my hand is here, you know.
And that's how
Bernard
you do
Purdy. Yes. Bernard Purdy's instructional video, he's playing and talking at the same time. And when he has something to say, he takes the volume of his playing all the way down.
But
to where he's still carrying the groove,
Wow.
and you can hear him talk.
Wow.
And then he says things like, and then I go like this, and he punctuates his sentences with drum fills.
Wow.
So much control,
That's cool.
so much nuance. The motherfucker kills this whole instructional video. He's wearing a jacket and a hat. He doesn't take his fucking hat off yet. That's how damn comfortable and communicative he is on the drums.
Yeah.
It's not a stretch for me to say I don't think that there is a master who is more masterful than Bernard Purdy. And in him playing a halftime shuffle, there's no way I could ever vote against it. So, camera eye, Bob Ross nod, Yarb's comments and influence on my vote, which would make me want to change my vote typically. I'm still not changing my vote, although I do acknowledge your point, Yarb. You're right about it. I still scored it 10-9 home at last. What'd you do, Pete?
Well, so, you know, Camera Eye for me is one of the best examples of that semi-long form prog songs that Rush did so well.
Right.
You know, and it goes to a lot of places. That's what I like about it. I kind of like the intro, that
Very evocative of
and that-
2112.
Yes, well, so interesting. I was going to make this comment. 2112 was that whole, based on Ayn Rand's book. The whole album's based on, you know, this futuristic, you know, expression and artistic creativity is, you know, just completely eliminated from society. Everything is done for you. You know, everything is decided for you. And then they went off and Permanent Waves was 1980. What was before? Hemispheres is 78 or something?
Yes, the Hemispheres, yeah.
So they go off and do Hemispheres and Permanent Waves. And then this album, Moving Pictures, kind of comes back to this futuristic thing.
Yeah.
Like in that. And they're talking a lot about stuff like that. And
Between this and Red Barchetta.
and Vital Signs.
Vital Signs, yeah.
But I just liked the different places that the song went. And I love that drum fill when it's you know, ding, 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 it goes to the fast part.
Right.
And then it breaks down to the slow one, and they come back to the original theme. Bound, dee, bound. He's doing the upbeats on the ride cymbal. And then it's bound,
Like an octopus playing drums.
Yeah, and just those little bass drum hi-hat fills and everything. It was another one of those songs. Me and my air drumming friends, we would stand up in front of a group of about 15 or 20 people and air drum entire Rush songs. And this one was one of the most difficult ones to remember all the licks, because all, you know, it's faster, it's slower, it's changing tempos and stuff like that. And but Home at Last is a great song. But you talk about that halftime feel.
Yeah.
Is Bernard Purdy also on Babylon Sisters?
Yes.
So this is the gig. When I find myself singing Home at Last, what I end up doing is I do the lyric for Home at Last, and then I go,
And the part for
Babylon
Babylon
Sisters. And it's like, I get the two songs because it really is the same feel. And because of that, I love that halftime feel. But Babylon Sisters was the album before. That was first. So that was before Home at Last. So because of that, that's one of my favorite things about Home at Last, but he actually did that before in Babylon Sisters, and Home at Last, too often it reminds me of Babylon Sisters. And so because of that, and just the whole scope of Camera Eye, I went 10-9 Camera Eye.
Okay. You know what? I also wanted to acknowledge that Timothy B. Schmidt was a backup vocalist on Home at Last. And who in the fuck knew what Timothy B. Schmidt was up to in 1977 or 76 when they recorded this? which of course, he did a great job on Home at Last, but when you got Chuck Rainey around, you can leave your bass in the case.
Yeah.
Again, just like Michael McDonald. No, it's okay, man. We got Joe Sample. You don't need to step to the keys.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, I love how we are splitting these rounds and how the margins are so close.
It's razor.
Yeah. Round 6 is Witch Hunt versus I Got the News. Now, for me, I Got the News was a song that I swore to God Joe Sample was on. I got the news. Dun, dunk, 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 dunk.
That's
it's Victor Feldman.
Yeah.
It's not even Joe Sample.
No, yeah.
I thought for years that was Joe Sample because those chords are, they're sample-esque.
Yeah.
And Victor Feldman, he appears on all of the songs on this album.
Yep.
Playing a variety of stuff. I mean, he's doing
Acoustic
whatever.
piano,
What do we need?
Rhodes.
We need a Rhodes. What do we need? You need a shaker?
Yeah.
You need somebody to play a go-go's? I'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
He's everywhere, and he's brilliant, and he's masterful. Also, Ed Green. This is the one track on this album that Ed Green played on. And Ed Green is not a guy who showed up on a bunch of Steely Dan records, but Ed Green shows up in the lexicon of music because he practically invented floor on the floor disco beat.
Really? Yeah.
Ed Green all day long.
Which is dubstep, house music. I mean, it's
everything.
It's everything.
Yes.
You go to a club in Vegas and you wait for the drop, and that bass drum is going to be on all
and
four.
Here it comes, all four. Yep. And so it was famously known as Four on the Floor. Ed Green, he played Disco Inferno for the Tramps.
Okay. All right.
And he's great. Not that I wanted him to show up on more Steely Dan tracks, but I do want to acknowledge Ed Green because he's awesome.
I would have to interrupt real quick. So, getting to the disco thing and the classic Four on the Floor, but the classic also on the hi-hat is the open hi-hat on 2 and 4.
Yeah.
So, you know what me and my Amador musician friends call that kind of beat?
What?
A soupy sales beat.
The soupy sales beat.
Because
you're making soup.
Soupy sales.
Yeah.
So if, Jerry Moore says, Crosby, do a soupy sales, I know that's Scots. So that's what we call it, soupy sales.
Soupy sales.
Because it sounds like soupy sales. Okay, that's my... Back to you, John.
No mention of which Sales brother played the drums. Did either one of them play the drums? Remember Hunt and Tony Sales, who were in Tin Man with David Bowie?
No, I don't, but now that you mention it, I'll pretend that I do.
Oh, yeah. Those motherfuckers are bad. Tin Man was a badass band.
Okay.
And it was a 4-piece band, and it was David Bowie and Hunt and Tony Sales, and they may have been the bass player and keyboard player or the guitar player and keyboard player, and I don't know then who played drums for that band.
Okay.
But Soupy Sales had kids, and they were musicians, and they're bad motherfuckers.
That's interesting.
So, yeah. Hunt and Tony Sales, wherever you are, if you hear this, you guys are badasses. Come on the show. Okay. I scored it 10-9. I Got the News. I know I didn't talk much about Witch Hunt, but I feel like the album has sort of lost the head of steam that it had. It came out with a Marvin Hagler round 1, and it's great. It's a great album. It continues to be great. Witch Hunt, not my favorite song on the, not one of my favorite songs of the 7. What did you do, Yarb?
So I really do enjoy I Got the News. It's, again, another one with Michael McDonald in there. There's this point, and just correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like there's this point where they do a time signature change. It goes from sort of a dun 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 to a ba 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 ba, and it picks up pace to it's that little section where he comes in, and there's just a little adventure that they take you on in that section.
The bridge.
Yeah.
I think it stays
4-4.
But
it stays 4-4.
But they might throw a 2-4 in there or something.
And it does feel different because it's a really transitional kind of bridge.
And that's almost what, like I said, I'm a little rusty on that. It's been a while, but that's what it feels like. I think where Witch Hunt wins me here is.
It wins you again.
It wins me again. It's the mood. It sets
I
a
agree.
very
Yeah.
haunting paranoid. And this is where a name that we have neglected to mention comes in, and that's Terry Brown. Long-time
producer, yeah.
of Rush, did a lot of their albums until, I want to say, like maybe two albums from this. But he worked with them for a very long time, produced a lot of their big stuff, and he really does arrange just a very haunting, paranoid, and of course this is all part of a multiple composition of Neil's called Fear that appears over multiple Rush albums. And I don't have it pulled up at the moment, but because this is part 3 of Fear. I want to say that part 4 or part 5 showed up on Clockwork Angels or something, or Snakes and Arrows, or somewhere in there. But he has just peppered this composition that he calls Fear throughout their 41-year career.
Yeah, it is a really different feel. They really did shift gears on it, and God damn it, I shouldn't have gone first this round. How did you score it, Pete?
Okay, so when I first heard it, I loved the satanic feel of Witch Hunt. There is definitely a satanic kind of thing going on. It's dark, because the witches and blah, blah, blah. And he
loves the satanic feel of candle wax melted onto his nipples, too.
Well, that true. That I still do. Yeah.
You too?
So I wasn't really exposed to metal yet at this point in my life. I hadn't discovered Sabbath and everything. So for me, this was pretty dark. This was a kind of a dark song, and I liked that. And but I Got the News might be my favorite track on Asia.
Yeah.
And I just love the that dotted ding ding boom boom boom, and I also like the bass line. Do 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 do.
Yeah.
But then
Very complimentary.
Mixes it up. He mixes it up. It's boom 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 boom. Ba-do do. Ba-do do do. Yeah.
And then you
Like
get
the third time around, he just does 2 notes, and then not even dotted. It's like the dot.
Right.
Dun 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 dun. Ba-do da. Ba-do. Leaves that little space. That third time, he just does 2 quarter notes and boom 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 boom. And always doing that boom tap-a-doo bing. You can tell that that's something that Fagan probably said. That lick you did, do that every time. Ba-doom tap-a-doo. That's how the song starts out.
Right.
Yeah.
Boom tap-a-doo.
Ed Green was also the king of finding something that worked and working the fuck out of it.
Wow. Okay. So once again, a lot of the songs, they have a swing feel. You know, they've got this swing shuffle feel, and this is a quick song, but it still has that. You don't have to be slow. It doesn't have to be a halftime shuffle. Even this song, it's got that, got that shuffle kind of swing feel and
fusion almost. It really,
yeah. And kind of funky too.
Yeah.
Victor Feldman again on piano, and the horns are understated. Bum, 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 bum. Just really underneath. And this is a song I've always wanted to be in a Steely Dan cover band, and this would definitely be one of the songs I want to play. It's just a song that I sing to myself and play on drums, and I'd love to do it in a group. In a cover band, it'd be fun. So 10-9 for me for the News.
Okay, but let's face it. If you ever want to do something terribly and fail with miserable results, start a Steely Dan or Rush cover band.
Yeah.
Right.
Either
If
one.
you ever want
Yeah.
to realize your inadequacy,
Yeah.
go ahead and
Right.
start a cover band for either one of these bands.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, I looked it up real quick. 4 parts to Fear, spread out over Grace, Under Pressure, Signals, Moving Pictures, and Vapor Trails. So, and all of those albums were scattered over their career, not in any sort of order either.
Wow.
I mean, it was
Interesting.
part 1 was on the '84 album after he'd already written part 3. So it just it's pretty wild that he just kind of
That is cool.
layered that over the career.
That is very cool.
That is cool. All right. We're coming on the home stretch now. We've got round 7. Vital Signs versus Josie. Yarb, start us off.
So Vital Signs speaks to me lyrically very much right now, where I am from a professional standpoint. I'm doing my creative things on the side, but I still have the day job. And there's a great line right at the beginning. Sometimes the circuits get shorted by external interference. Signals get crossed by internal incoherence. And so it just lyrically is a really awesome, and I love just the way that it sort of almost an electronica start. Almost, it feels a little bit like Spirit of the Radio, but not quite as maybe refined is the word I'd want. By the time they do Spirit of Radio, it's a much more, or actually I think Spirit of Radio may have come first.
It did.
It definitely has that. You can tell that influence of that opening to it. And I really like it, but Josie is, to me, that's another one that is just, I hear it if I'm flipping through the radio. Oh, that's Steely Dan. I got to stop and listen to this song. Raw Flame, Live Wire, Eyes Like a Roman. You're gonna be shocked by this, because this is the one that I went back and forth. Like, I was still listening to it before we even got on here. But it is.
Slow down. I'm savoring this. My nipples are getting hard. Say it again. Say it a little breathier. A little breathier.
10-9 in favor of Josie.
Oh.
God, it's so good.
Yeah.
There's just, it's got such a fun feel to it. It infuses that jazz. It infuses the funk.
Arch your back a little bit.
Has, right. He. You can tell he is having fun with this song, and I feel like this might be the one song on the album, having listened to it like 4 times in the last 3 days, that to me really feels like he has the most fun.
Okay. Well, that's great. I will echo those comments. When Josie comes home, it's a big finish for the album. I think Vital Signs, though, this was a really, really tough round, because Vital Signs was experimentation for them that really showed up later on and kept coming, and it really started a theme where they integrated, synthesizers, of course, but they still allowed for like a reggae influence in the guitar to be mixed with the electronica. I think that their mastery of composition is of course obvious in songs like Tom Sawyer, but in songs like Vital Signs, I think we see subtleties that just are, you don't have the length of career that they have enjoyed without being able to flex within your lane. And I think that Vital Signs is a great example of that. Josie, though, was the perfect finish for this album. I think you're right. It did have some levity in there. The chords that they used there and the kind of resolution that Josie gives you made it the perfect last track of the album. And Jim Keltner. I mean, the thing about the building of a Rolls Royce simile that we're using for Steely Dan is that they would have, and this is from a Rick Marotta story, they would have an amazing band in there recording a song, and they'd get great takes from all the guys, and they would just be spectacular. And they'd go, all right, guys, thanks a lot. And we're talking about A-list guys, and they're packing up and walking out, and walking in, pardon me, is another fucking amazing band.
Just 7 brand new guys.
And 7 brand new guys. And Marotta would say that we were walking out of there, and it'd be me and, Jay Graydon or Skunk Baxter, and we'd be saying, hey, see you guys. And as we're walking out, here in comes Steve Gadd and fucking... this is the reason why we see Jim Keltner on one track. We see Ed Green on one track. For all we know, Jim Keltner performed a version of all 7 of these songs. This is the one that he did the best. And so this is the one that showed up on the album. And that is really, really, really difficult to live up to if you're any other band. You know, now the thing about building a Rolls Royce is the fucking shit will cost you a lot of money. But back then they'd get, here's $1.5 million, go record 7 songs. And they'd record 7 motherfuckers.
Wow.
And turn out an album like Asia.
Right.
Nowadays, if a band gets a budget to record, it's like, okay, go down in your mother's garage.
With your own equipment. Here's $4,500. So you can at least buy the guys lunch every once in a while. And don't get 7-piece. I'm not looking for Tom Scott and fucking 6 horn players. Take it easy. You know, and so I pine for those days. I miss those days. And for that reason, I voted for Josie 10-9. And I know I went really, really, really Steely Dan heavy in this album fight, but I can't say enough how much I love and respect Rush, how much I love and respect Neil Peart. You know, all 3 of them, they're all great, but especially because I'm a drummer and because they have such a place in, you know, the approachability and then the challenge of learning to play drums. And he embodied that in a way that was unique. And then as our playing, I'm speaking for myself and Pete, grew more sophisticated, as our tastes grew more sophisticated, as our realization, as many people have told us when you're a kid, you don't even know what you don't know. And the older you get, the more you realize what you don't know. There's a great story about how Neil Peart, at the height of his powers, went to Peter Erskine and said, I want to play jazz.
I want to play jazz. I want to undo everything I know and learn it all over again.
He said he specifically, I want to get sloppier. People say that I play too clean.
Yeah.
So he wanted to get something, you know.
He wanted to get a command of that level of slop that Bernard Purdy lives in. And, you know, I have to tip my cap to him and say that all of the nice things I've said about Rick Marotta and will continue to say, I probably will say them when I meet Neil Peart too, because you've never heard anybody in the industry or otherwise say any disparaging thing about Neil Peart ever. Have you?
The only thing I've heard is that he's kind of quiet. And that
he's very reserved.
Like fans have said that he's maybe even standoffish.
Okay.
Yeah, like
he won't stick around for that. And there's that lyric in Limelight. I can't pretend a stranger is a long-awaited friend.
If you remember the documentary on Rush, there are scenes where Geddy and Alex are out like in a cafe, and Geddy even says, you know, I just made a decision. If someone listens to our music and they want an autograph, I'm cool with that. I'll give them the time to the signature, and you know, it's Geddy and Alex are out in the cafe, and any of their scenes when they're out in the real world, Neil's not there. Yeah, he's only in front of a screen, you know, doing an interview in some studio or something like that. And so he's like kind of like what people say about Steve Martin, you know, he kind of keeps to himself. But as far as, you know, he's not like a jerk to anybody, and I haven't heard anything like that. Just that he's kind of a more private person,
private guy. Yeah.
I can't take anything away from that.
No.
But Pete, as our guest, Yarb, you're my co-host in this episode. You're not our guest anymore. It's like you have refrigerator privilege on the Break It Down show. So I'm going to give DJ PJ, who is in the house, the Boogie Down professional, the last word on this show. Fire away.
Well, so I haven't even done my...
Yeah, I know. It's your.
Okay, I got it.
You score in round 7.
Okay, so Vital Signs, if I remember correctly, it's the only song that Neil actually uses any sort of electronic drums. That snare.
Yeah.
That typical early 80s sound.
Yeah.
And if you remember, 80, 81, this is when electronic drums really hit the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Phil Collins.
And I remember specifically that Bill
Bruford, right,
got an award from some
for having
entity.
the big brass balls.
Yep, for doing revolutionary work, integrating electronic drums into his drumming.
Yeah.
So 81 is the same year that Discipline came out and blew everybody away. Crimson hadn't been around for 7 years, and this was a totally new incantation, totally new sound for them. And on Discipline, he expertly integrated electronic drums in with an analog set. So he had both regular drums and electronic drums. So, and that was the seminal album that kind of brought that out. Well, this is 81 too, and this is Moving Pictures, and Neil Peart's doing the same thing, only on one track, but he's bringing in some electronic sound. I find Vital Signs to be the most forward-leaning song, the song that sounds more ahead of its time than any other song on that album, actually. Yeah. It just kind of has this futuristic sound. It sounds a lot. I hear sounds from Vital Signs that I'm going to hear for the next 8 years in 80s music, you know.
Wow, that's a great point.
You know, you think about it, just with the whole sound, it just sounds, you know, there's almost like a Kraftwerk kind of vibe going on in parts of it. But Josie was the second Steely Dan song I ever heard. Yeah. Again. Mm-hmm. I mean, that album had hits. The two biggest hits of theirs, I think, are Peg and Josie, right? Like, Peg is number one.
Yeah.
For them.
For sure.
Top of the charts. And Josie probably, you know, number two.
Think so? Not Hey 19?
What do you hear on the radio now more often?
Do It Again.
What?
Do It Again.
Yes, Do It Again. That was their
My
first
Old
one.
School.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
But certainly in good company.
Yes, and it's on the radio still here, and the boom, boom, dude, boom, you know that boom, dude, boom. That sliding, funky Chuck Rainey bass line is so good, and Victor on the Roads, the horns, the chords, it's just classic Steely Dan. Is it Rick Marotta on the? No, who's on
Jim Keltner?
Oh, that's right. You just said that, Jim Keltner. So that's weird because he kind of sounds like Rick on.
Yeah, he does.
It's that they can kind of sound like each other.
Yeah.
It was just I don't know. That song hit me. It was the 1-2 punch. I'd never heard Steely Dan before. Weren't familiar with any. I was 10 years old and this shit came out. Wasn't familiar with anything. Then Peg. And then Josie on the radio, and it's like, okay, I like this band. And so for me, Josie 10-9.
All right. Well, this was a great fight. We have among us a split decision. But, you know, Yarb, you and I are not far apart, as is typical. And, you know, for all the reasons that are really, really similar, but just the razor-thin margins. I want to... Yeah?
I was just going to say, it's really funny. A moment ago, you mentioned the ability to bring in all these multiple insanely talented bands, essentially, playing with Rush. They brought in one other musician, and that was, and I'm probably butchering his name, but it was Hugh Simey, who played synth on Witch Hunt. He also did some of the cover concept art for it. But that's the only other musician that got brought in. It was those three guys. And I think that's, to me, at the end of the day, that's probably why I leaned a little more. Just, I'm always gobsmacked by the fact that this sound can come out of three guys.
Yeah.
It blows me away.
Yeah, you're right. The Everpedia pages for these two albums differ in that one place, which is the additional musicians section on Steely Dan is a mile long, and the additional musician section on Moving Pictures has one guy, and it's Hugh. Yeah. So thank you, Hugh, and thanks, Rush, and thanks. And you know, we didn't give. It's usually Pete who gives the disclaimer at the beginning, which is we are in this fight because we love these albums and we want to pay respect to both of them. We did choose a winner. The winner was Steely Dan.
You know that scene in 40-Year-Old Virgin where Paul Rudd's character says, If I have to hear Yamo Be There one more time, I'm going to Yamo burn this place down. Well, that's how I felt after having to listen to Steely Dan for a whole entire album fight. It's just not for me. I can't handle it, so I'm sorry if you're a fan of theirs. It's my deficiency, not yours. I mean, you probably need soothing music like that after your hip replacement and all. But luckily we have the numbers to look at, and I don't have to listen to that god-awful album anymore. Interestingly, we ended up with a tie for total points on the official cards, 199 to 199. Now, you will note that Steely Dan did win the fight, 2 judges to 1. What does that tell you? Well, it says one judge thought it was pretty close, and the other 2 didn't. But they didn't agree with who won it. So it ended up going to the split decision. It's interesting. If you look at the 3 strong rounds for each, Rush took 5 of their 9, and Steely Dan took 6 of their 9. Remember, round 4 was a common round, and I'll note that Steely Dan took 2 of the 10s in that round. Also of note, there was only 1 knockdown, and it was against Steely Dan. But it's no surprise when Rush starts off the fight with arguably their most popular song. That was round 1. Looking at the unofficial cards, the fight shapes up a little bit closer to the pre-fight prediction, with an average score of 67.1 for Steely Dan and 66.3 for Rush, which is essentially a 4-3 fight as it was predicted. Well, I hear it's senior night at the Piccadilly Cafe, so I'm going to jump in the Chrysler and put on some Steely Dan so I can strap on the old feed bag and see if I can't fill up this adult diaper. Back to you guys.
It was not a unanimous decision. It was a split decision, as it should be. Because, again, any day, any 3 different guys, any 3 different viewpoints, and you're going to end up with the consensus, which is these 2 albums are both spectacular. Thanks, Yarb, for co-hosting this thing.
Yeah, great to meet you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and clean
Nice
the
to meet you.
refrigerator on your way out.
Absolutely.
And Peter Crosby, thank you for guesting on this episode. Will you do another one with us?
This was my great pleasure. And, just at the end of this episode, I realized how hard this is.
This is difficult.
This is difficult because you and Yarb are much smoother, and I'm, counting on my piece of paper notes, and it's hard. So maybe next time I'll be a little bit more smoother, just have a little bit more skills. But it's been my distinct pleasure and honor to be on the show.
Well, we're all just trying to emulate Yarbitude when it comes down to it. So, we'll all get there at some point, but not any point soon. Thanks, Yarb. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for having me.
See you, man.